He was broke, exhausted, and holding his little daughter's trembling hand when he asked a question that would change his life forever. Why is my wife's photo hanging inside a billionaire's mansion? What happened next was so shocking, so emotional, that no one in that room was prepared for the truth. Before we begin, if you love powerful stories that touch your heart and reveal hidden destinies, like this video and subscribe to Ever Bell's Tales, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. The rain had been falling since dawn, cold and relentless, soaking through Daniel Carter's thin jacket as he stood frozen in front of the towering iron gates. Each drop felt heavier than the last, as though the sky itself was pressing down on his already exhausted shoulders. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter Lily shivered, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his hand. Daniel adjusted her hood, forcing a reassuring smile he didn't feel. He had promised her everything would be fine, but in truth, he had no idea what awaited them beyond those gates. Only one thing had driven him here. An image burned into his mind, an image that refused to let him sleep, breathe, or think of anything else. His wife's face, hanging inside a billionaire's mansion. Just 2 hours earlier, Daniel had been standing outside the same property, not as a guest, but as an invisible man among many. He had come hoping to secure temporary work for the day, something, anything, to help him keep the electricity on for another week. The mansion was hosting a grand charity event, and workers were being hired on the spot for cleaning and setup. Daniel didn't belong in such a place. His shoes were worn thin, his hands rough from years of manual labor, his eyes permanently shadowed by grief and responsibility. Yet desperation had pushed him forward. While waiting near the service entrance, he had glanced through a tall glass window, just long enough for his entire world to tilt. There, framed in gold against a wall of marble, was the face he thought he would never see again, Emily. Smiling softly, her eyes warm and familiar, captured in a photograph Daniel himself had once taken on an old phone during a quiet afternoon in the park. At first, he convinced himself it couldn't be her. Grief played cruel tricks, especially when memories were all you had left. But the longer he stared, the clearer it became. The slight dimple on her left cheek, the gentle curve of her lips, even the blue dress she wore, the one she said made her feel brave on days she felt small. His breath had caught in his throat as his heart pounded violently against his ribs. That photo didn't belong there. Emily didn't belong there. She had hated luxury, avoided attention, and always said she felt safer living simply. So why was her image displayed inside one of the most expensive homes in the city? Now, standing at the gate, Daniel replayed every moment of his life with Emily. How they met at a bus stop on a cold winter morning. How she laughed when he spilled coffee on his shirt trying to impress her. How she insisted on cooking cheap meals together, turning scarcity into warmth. She never talked about her past, brushing off questions with a gentle smile and a change of subject. Daniel never pushed. Love to him was about trust, not interrogation. When Lily was born, Emily cried harder than anyone, holding her daughter like she was holding the world itself. Then, suddenly she was gone. A car accident, they said. Fast. Tragic, unavoidable. Daniel remembered identifying her body with shaking hands, the feeling that half his soul had been buried that day. The iron gates slowly creaked open, snapping Daniel back to the present. A security guard eyed him suspiciously, but after a brief explanation and a mention of the photograph, he was escorted inside. The mansion swallowed them whole. Crystal chandeliers glowed above, casting reflections across polished marble floors. Lily stared in awe, her eyes wide, but Daniel barely noticed the grandeur. His gaze was drawn only to the walls, scanning them desperately. Afraid the photo might disappear if he blinked, his heart raced as they were led into a vast hall, and there it was again. Emily, larger now, closer, undeniably real. Daniel felt his knees weaken. He tightened his grip on Lily's hand to steady himself. Memories flooded him so intensely that he could almost hear Emily's voice whispering his name. Lily tugged at his sleeve and asked softly, "Daddy, why is Mommy here?" He had no answer. His throat burned and tears threatened to spill, but he swallowed them back. He couldn't fall apart. Not now. Not in front of Lily. Footsteps echoed across the room. Slow and deliberate, Daniel turned to see a tall man approaching, dressed in a tailored suit that radiated power and authority. This had to be him, Richard Blackwood, the billionaire whose name appeared on buildings' headlines and whispered conversations about wealth beyond imagination. Daniel had expected arrogance, maybe indifference. Instead, when Richard's eyes landed on the photograph and then shifted to Daniel's face, something changed. A flicker of recognition, confusion, and something deeper. Pain. Daniel didn't plan to speak. The words tore themselves from his chest before fear could stop them. His voice cracked, echoing through the vast hall. "Why is my wife's photo in your mansion?" The question hung in the air like a fragile glass about to shatter. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the rain outside seemed to quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Lily pressed closer to her father, sensing the gravity of the moment without fully understanding it. Richard Blackwood stared at the photograph, his jaw tightening, his confident posture faltering just enough for Daniel to notice. The billionaire who commanded boardrooms and empires suddenly looked like a man standing at the edge of a long-buried memory. Daniel's heart pounded painfully as he waited for an answer. Bracing himself for rejection, denial, or humiliation, he had nothing left to lose. Not anymore. All he wanted was the truth. Why the woman he loved, the woman he mourned every day, was hanging on a wall where she never belonged. Richard Blackwood did not answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step toward the photograph, his gaze fixed on it as though Daniel and Lily were no longer in the room. The silence stretched painfully, thick and suffocating, until Daniel wondered if he had made a terrible mistake coming here. His chest burned with a mix of anger and fear. He had expected to be thrown out, maybe threatened, maybe dismissed as a lunatic. What he had not expected was this visible fracture in a man who was rumored to be untouchable. Richard raised a trembling hand and gently brushed his fingers along the edge of the frame, not touching the glass, as if he feared even that small contact might break something sacred. His voice, when it finally came, was low and uneven. "Her name wasn't Emily," he said quietly. "Not to me." Daniel stiffened. The words hit him harder than any insult could have. His wife had been many things. Kind, patient, loving, but a liar. The idea felt like a betrayal, and yet something in Richard's tone made it clear this was not a lie meant to hurt. "She was Eleanor," Richard continued, turning slowly to face Daniel. "Eleanor Hayes." The name sounded foreign in Daniel's ears, but the face attached to it was the same face he had kissed goodnight for years, the same face he saw every time he closed his eyes. Daniel's hands curled into fists as confusion swirled violently inside him. He demanded to know what Richard meant, how he knew his wife, why a man like him would even remember a woman like Eleanor at all. Richard exhaled deeply, as though releasing decades of weight from his chest. He gestured toward a nearby seating area, but Daniel remained standing, unwilling to make himself comfortable in a place that felt like it was built on secrets. Lily, sensing the tension, leaned against her father's leg. Richard noticed her then, really noticed her, and his expression softened in a way Daniel did not expect. For a brief moment, the billionaire's mask slipped completely. Richard began to speak, his words slow and deliberate, unraveling a story buried under years of silence. Eleanor, he explained, had been the daughter of his former business partner, a man who once shared his dreams and ambition. They had built an empire together, or so Richard believed, until greed and betrayal tore everything apart. Lawsuits, accusations, and public disgrace followed, destroying Eleanor's family and leaving her caught in the middle of a war she never asked to be part of. Richard and Eleanor had fallen in love during that time, young and reckless, believing love alone could survive anything. But it didn't. The pressure, the media, and Richard's obsession with salvaging his business consumed him. He made choices that protected his wealth but destroyed her trust. Eleanor begged him to walk away, to choose peace over power. He didn't. One day she was gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. Richard searched for her for years, using every resource at his disposal. But she had vanished completely, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a guilt that never faded. Daniel listened, his heart twisting painfully as the pieces began to fall into place. Emily's reluctance to talk about her past, her discomfort around wealthy people, her fear of being photographed. None of it had made sense before. Now it did. She hadn't been hiding from Daniel. She had been hiding from a life that once broke her. Richard admitted that he discovered the truth only after her death. A private investigator, hired out of lingering regret rather than hope, had found records connecting Eleanor Hayes to Emily Carter. The photograph on the wall was taken secretly, the last confirmation Richard needed that the woman he loved was alive, but no longer reachable. Daniel felt anger rise again, sharp and burning. "So you watched her," he said bitterly. "You put her on your wall like a memory you owned, while I buried her." Richard flinched at the words, and for the first time, he did not try to defend himself. Instead, tears filled his eyes, real, unrestrained tears that caught Daniel completely off guard. "I never meant to claim her," Richard said, his voice breaking. "That photograph is not ownership, it's remorse. It's the reminder of everything I lost because I chose wrong." He looked at Lily again, his gaze lingering, and something inside him shattered. "She looks just like her," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The same eyes, the same quiet strength. Lily tilted her head and asked innocently, "Did you know my mommy?" The simplicity of the question broke whatever composure Richard had left. He nodded slowly, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally did, his voice was gentle, almost reverent. "Yes," he said. "She was very brave." The room felt smaller then, heavy with shared grief and unspoken truths. Daniel's anger softened into a deep, aching sadness. He realized that Emily had carried this entire history alone, shielding him and Lily from a past she believed would only bring pain. She had chosen love over wealth, obscurity over power. And in doing so, she had given Daniel the greatest gift of his life, her whole heart. Richard straightened, wiping his face, and met Daniel's eyes with something that resembled humility. He apologized, not as a billionaire, not as a powerful man, but as someone who had failed the woman they both loved. He admitted that no amount of money could undo the damage, but he needed Daniel to know the truth, even if it meant facing his hatred. The silence that followed was no longer tense, it was heavy with understanding. 3 lives, bound by one woman, stood at the crossroads of past and present, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The words seemed impossible, almost unreal, yet they echoed through the grand hall with a weight that made Daniel's chest tighten. Richard Blackwood stood motionless for a moment, his gaze fixed on Lily as if she were the final piece of a puzzle he had been searching for his entire life. Then, slowly, as though his legs no longer trusted him, the billionaire lowered himself until he was kneeling in front of the small girl. The marble floor felt cold even from a distance, but Richard did not seem to notice. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, fragile and raw. I believe I am your grandfather." Daniel felt the world tilt. The room blurred as if all the air had been sucked out at once. He instinctively pulled Lily closer, his arms wrapping around her protectively, not in anger but in disbelief. His mind raced, rejecting the idea even as it began assembling all the hidden clues. Emily's sudden disappearance years before she met him, her unspoken fears, the way she sometimes stared at Lily with an expression that felt heavier than simple joy. Richard explained haltingly that Eleanor had been pregnant when she vanished, that he never knew, never suspected. She had disappeared before there was time for truth or reconciliation. The realization struck Daniel with devastating clarity. Lily was the living bridge between 2 worlds that were never meant to collide. Lily looked between the 2 men, her young face filled with confusion rather than fear. "What's a grandfather?" she asked softly. The question cracked something open in Daniel's chest. He knelt beside her, brushing her hair back gently, trying to find words that wouldn't frighten her. Richard smiled through tears and answered first, his voice trembling but warm. "It's someone who loves you very much, just like your daddy does." Lily studied his face, then nodded slowly, as if accepting this strange new truth with the simple wisdom only a child could possess. Daniel stood, his legs unsteady, his emotions colliding violently inside him. Part of him wanted to reject everything, to walk away, to protect Lily from another world that could hurt her the way it had hurt Emily. But another part of him, quieter and more honest, knew this wasn't about wealth or power. It was about blood, truth, and a chance at healing something long broken. Richard rose to his feet, keeping a respectful distance, and faced Daniel directly. He did not offer a check or a promise of luxury. Instead, he offered responsibility. "I can't change the past," Richard said, his voice steady but full of remorse. "But I can be here now. For her. For you if you'll allow it." He spoke of education, stability, and support. not as obligations but as opportunities Lily deserved. He made it clear that Daniel would always be her father, that nothing and no one could replace that bond. Daniel searched Richard's face for arrogance, for manipulation, but found none. Only regret and hope. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes as memories of sleepless nights and whispered prayers flooded his mind. He thought of Lily's small bed in their cramped apartment, of the way she pretended not to notice when he skipped meals so she could eat. Pride had kept him going, but love had kept him standing. Now, love demanded something harder, trust. Slowly, Daniel nodded. For her, he said quietly. We do this for her. Richard bowed his head, overwhelmed, as though the simple acceptance meant more than any victory he had ever achieved. In the weeks that followed, life began to change in ways Daniel never imagined. Not overnight, not magically, but meaningfully. Richard did not sweep them into luxury. Instead, he visited their modest home, sat at their worn kitchen table, and listened. He learned about Lily's favorite stories, about Emily's love for simple things, about the life she chose when she walked away from wealth. True to his word, Richard helped secure Lily's future, education funds, healthcare, and opportunities, without ever taking away Daniel's dignity. Together, they created something lasting. A foundation was established in Emily's name, dedicated to helping struggling single parents. People like Daniel, people Emily would have understood. It wasn't about erasing the past, but honoring it. Lily gained a grandfather who showed up, who attended school events and learned how to braid her hair badly but enthusiastically. Daniel gained something he never expected, peace. Not because life was suddenly easy, but because the unanswered questions no longer haunted him. The photograph of Emily still hangs in the mansion, but it no longer feels like a mystery or a wound. It is a symbol, a reminder of love that crossed worlds, of choices made and redeemed, and of a woman whose quiet courage shaped destinies long after she was gone. Daniel often stands before it with Lily, telling her stories about her mother, stories of kindness, strength, and love. And every time the bells of a new beginning ring softly in his heart, he knows that one question, asked in desperation, became the key to a future filled with hope.